The Queen's guards were 4 rows away from the bed of moonflowers, and the only thing standing between them and the truth was a thin layer of dark soil I had packed down before dawn. I kept my hands moving. Snip a dead bloom, drop it in the basket, move to the next stem. My pulse was not as steady as my hands because buried under that soil was a glass shard no bigger than a fingernail, and if a guard's boot pressed too hard in the wrong spot, every secret I carried would come apart in a single afternoon. These days, everyone in the palace simply calls me Nora, the gardener who keeps the moonflowers blooming. It is a good enough name. It has lasted me longer than some of the others. Someone had tried to end Queen Elira's life the night before. A vial of slow poison had been slipped into the leaves used for her evening tea, and only the taster's sharp nose had caught the bitterness in time. Now the whole palace was being turned over stone by stone, hedge by hedge, and I was the last person in the eastern garden the guards had not yet searched. I was not afraid of being caught with dirt on my hands. I was afraid of being caught with proof of a plot far larger than the guards understood. Proof I had spent 6 weeks gathering one quiet conversation at a time. If they found that shard, they would only see a frightened human holding evidence she could not explain. They would never believe the truth, which is that I had done this 7 times before. On 7 worlds the Queen had never visited, and not one throne had fallen because of a blade. I am not a soldier. I have never carried a weapon in my life. What I carry is patience, and the kind of trust that only grows when nobody important is watching you. It started years ago, in a greenhouse on a tired freighter station, sorting seeds for traders who barely looked at me twice. A woman named Helen Okafor noticed something about gardeners that I had never noticed about myself. People say everything in front of the help. They complain about their masters while you trim their hedges. They argue about money while you water their plants. They forget you are even in the room, because nobody important watches the person holding the pruning shears. Helen ran a quiet network called the Quiet Service, built from people who had learned that same lesson. We did not start wars. We listened to the ones already happening underneath the surface, gathered the loose threads, and pulled them in the right order, until a rotten structure came down under its own weight. I trained for 2 years before they trusted me with a posting of my own, and the first throne I helped topple was the Salt Court of Corvain, where the ruling family had been starving half their own people to keep grain prices high for trade partners across 3 systems. It took 8 months of quiet letters reaching the right farmers at the right time. Nobody was harmed. The court simply lost the loyalty that had been holding it together, and the family stepped down rather than face their own citizens at the palace gate. After Corvan came the Ember Throne of Dis, then the Floating Spires of Calduin, then 4 more I will not list one by one, because the details blur together after enough years on enough worlds. Find the rot. Show it clearly to the people standing closest to it. Let them decide what to do once they finally see it without anyone hiding it from them. 7 thrones, and not one of them fell to violence. That was the rule the Quiet Service lived by, and the rule I had built my entire life around. When they sent me to the Virian Empire, I expected an 8th. The report said the Empire had been stripping resources from conquered moons for 2 generations, working laborers past exhaustion, and paying them in promises instead of currency. That was usually enough reason for the Quiet Service to send someone in quietly. I arrived 8 months ago with forged papers and a genuine talent for growing things, and within a season I was placed in the royal gardens, exactly as planned. Then I actually watched Queen Elira rule. She was young for the throne, barely older than I was, and she had spent her first year fighting her own council to end the labor contracts on those moons. I watched her sit through sessions that ran past midnight. I watched her send food shipments to settlements her advisors called not worth the cost. I watched her walk this same garden alone some evenings, just to think clearly without anyone reminding her she was a queen first and a person never. She was not the rot. She was trying to cut it out, and losing more often than winning, because the people who profited most from the old system were the same people sitting closest to her throne. I sent that report back through the Quiet Service 6 months ago. Stand down. This one is not ours to topple. This one might be ours to protect. Which is how I ended up on my knees in the dirt this morning, hiding proof of exactly who had tried to poison her. His name was Chancellor Drevin, and he had grown wealthy from the very labor contracts Elira wanted to end. I had suspected him for weeks, ever since a kitchen worker named Petra, who owed me a small favor from months earlier, mentioned that Drevin's steward had been asking strange questions about the Queen's tea schedule. I started watching him the way I watch everyone, quietly, from a distance, while pruning the hedge beneath his study window in the evenings. 3 weeks ago I heard him promise a shipping contract to a man whose voice I recognized from the lower docks, a man known for selling rare poisons to people who could pay enough to stay unnamed. 2 weeks ago I watched gold change hands in an alley behind the kitchens. Gold that I later traced back to Dreven's personal accounts. Last night, someone tried to poison the Queen's tea, and the only reason I had evidence buried in my flower bed was because Petra slipped me the dead taster's notes before the guards arrived to seal the kitchen. I was still deciding how to get that evidence into the right hands when a shadow fell across my basket. Captain Thane stood over the row of moonflowers, arms crossed, studying me the way he studied everyone these days, like a man who trusted no one and was tired of pretending otherwise. "You have worked in this garden every morning for 8 months, Nora," he said, "and somehow you are always near whatever happens." I kept clipping. "Gardens need tending every morning, Captain. That has not changed since I arrived. The taster who caught last night's poison used to work your greenhouse rotation. The steward who first reported strange noises near the Chancellor's study takes his meals where you take yours. I do not believe in that many coincidences." My pulse climbed, but my hands did not shake, because shaking hands are what give people away, not steady ones. "I talk to people, Captain. Gardeners and kitchen staff and stewards all eat in the same hall. If you are searching for a conspiracy, I would start with whoever benefits most from the Queen never finishing her reforms, not with whoever happens to enjoy good company at dinner." He studied me a moment longer, long enough that I started planning what I would say if he ordered the row of moonflowers dug up right there. Then a runner sprinted across the lawn, breathless, calling his name, telling him every captain was needed in the receiving hall before the harvest accord ceremony began. He left, but 2 of his guards did not. They moved toward the staff quarters instead, and my stomach turned, because my room held a small garden journal on the shelf beside my bed, filled with notes that looked like planting schedules to anyone who did not know how to read them. Dates that were really meeting times, flower names that were really people. If a sharp enough guard sat with that journal long enough, it would not stay a secret forever. I had no way to reach my room before they did, so I did the only thing left to do. I kept working, kept my face calm, and trusted the same thing I had trusted on 7 worlds before this one, that ordinary things are the best place in the universe to hide something extraordinary. A journal full of garden notes, written in a gardener's handwriting, sitting exactly where a gardener's journal should sit, is rarely worth a second look from men in a hurry to reach a ceremony on time. Word reached me an hour later, through Petra again, that the guards had searched my room for less than 2 minutes and found nothing worth reporting. The journal had stayed exactly where it belonged, boring enough to be invisible. By midday I had pressed the glass shard into Petra's palm, along with 3 lines written the night before, naming names, dates, and the location of a ledger Dreven kept hidden behind a false panel in his study. A ledger that recorded every coin he had paid to silence people who asked too many questions. I told her exactly where to deliver it, to a steward loyal to the Queen's own mother, someone with no reason to protect Dreven and every reason to want the truth standing in front of the court. Then I did the only thing a gardener could do without raising suspicion. I prepared the flowers for the ceremony table, the same task I performed every season since I arrived, and I made sure every arrangement near the head table included sage, the one plant whose strong scent could mask the smell of almost anything slipped into a glass. The harvest accord ceremony began at midday under a sky the color of pale gold. Queen Alira stood at the center of the courtyard in full ceremonial dress, the treaty scroll resting on a stand before her, surrounded by every noble house in the empire, including Chancellor Dreven, who smiled at her with the calm of a man who still believed he controlled the outcome. I stood near the back with the other staff, close enough to see Dreven's steward reach toward the Queen's ceremonial cup the moment her attention turned to greet a visiting delegate. That was when the side doors of the courtyard opened, and the steward loyal to the Queen's mother walked in carrying the ledger Petra had retrieved that morning, holding it high enough for the front rows to see clearly. The courtyard fell into the particular kind of silence that only happens when everyone understands, all at once, that something has changed. The steward read the names aloud, the dates, the payments, the connection between Dreven's accounts and the poison that had nearly reached the Queen the night before. Dreven's allies stepped back from him one at a time, the way people always step back once loyalty suddenly costs more than it pays. His own steward, the one still reaching toward the cup, simply lowered his hand and walked away from the table, as though he had never approached it at all. Dreven did not shout, and he did not run. He stood there as the guards approached, his calm cracking into something smaller and far less certain, and allowed himself to be led away to face the Queen's justice, the kind that comes with a trial and a verdict, not a blade in a garden. Queen Alira watched him go without saying a single word, then turned back to the treaty scroll on its stand and signed it in front of every house that had doubted she would survive long enough to finish what she started. That evening she walked through the garden alone, the way she always did when she needed to think, and she stopped near the row of moonflowers where I was finishing my work for the day. Strange thing happened today, she said, more to the flowers than to me. Someone delivered exactly the right evidence, at exactly the right moment, through exactly the right hands, so that no one could call it a rumor and look away. Strange indeed, Your Majesty, I said, and kept trimming. You always grow sage near the head table during ceremonies, she said. I noticed it again today. It has a very strong scent. Sage keeps the bees calm, Your Majesty. Calm bees make for a calmer ceremony. She studied me the way Captain Thane had studied me that morning, except where his eyes held suspicion. Hers held something closer to quiet curiosity, the kind that never quite turns into an accusation. Then she smiled. Thank you for the flowers, Nora, she said, and walked on toward the palace, never once asking the one question that would have unraveled everything I had spent 8 months building. Captain Thane passed me on his way to evening watch a short while later. He paused, just for a moment, and looked at the row of moonflowers, then at me, then at the moonflowers again, as though counting something that did not quite add up. He said nothing. He simply nodded once, the way a man nods when he has decided a question is not worth asking, if he already suspects he will not like the answer, and walked on. The queen never learned that the woman trimming her flowers had already watched 7 other thrones fall through patience instead of violence, on 7 worlds she would never visit, under 7 names that were never the one I used here. She never learned how close her own throne had come to becoming an 8th quiet collapse, before I decided her reign was worth protecting instead of ending. She only knew her gardener grew good sage, and that the flowers on her table always seemed to arrive at exactly the right time. I went back to my pruning as the sun dropped behind the palace walls, already thinking about tomorrow's roses, already certain that tomorrow, like every day before it, no one would think to ask the quiet woman with dirt on her hands what she had truly spent her morning doing. Some thrones fall because someone swings a blade. Others stand a little taller, season after season, because someone simply waters the right garden, and waits.